When they have retrieved extraterrestrial objects and they've done the assays, the metallurgical studies and atomic studies, the material is so pure that even in the vacuum of space, we could not create it with any known human technologies, because it's being created transdimensionally using these sort of electronic fields that cause matter to be aggregated, if you will, out of thin air, out of space. Because everything is, space is not empty. The majority of the cosmos, black energy, black, dark matter, et cetera, and so on, you can aggregate the subatomic, atomic, and molecular structure for any element, or any matter, or any complex molecule, and materialize it. Does this make sense? It is a known science in the very high end of the intelligence community. Now we're talking about something which the guys I know at the CIA call WSFM, weird science and frickin' magic. And that is what they call it. Now, my uncle worked for Northrop Grumman on the lunar module, landed on the moon, and I talked to an engineer there not long ago, and he said, yes, we just call it PFM. And excuse my language, pure fucking magic. And he says that's what they call it. He was an aerospace engineer. And so when you begin to deal with these sort of very advanced technologies, there are grades of it. So there's man-made anti-grav, there's man-made anti-gravity systems that have been hybridized studying extraterrestrial materials, a notch up. Then you have the purely extraterrestrial objects, which are a quantum leap beyond. Now, since Ben Rich died in 1995, and he made those comments, in the last 21 years, trillions of dollars have been spent on this, and some of the most brilliant minds in the world have worked on it. And some of these gentlemen I know, scientists, and they've worked in the Cube, as it's called, up there at the Skunk Works underground, not far from Palmdale. And in the Cube, they've done things that are now transdimensional. So now they have the ability to hoax events that really, even more so, look extraterrestrial, but are man-made. Very dangerous business. Now, this is why the president-elect and the Congress and the National Military Command Center and the director of the CIA and the Secretary of Defense and the generals on the Joint Chiefs of Staff, most of whom will never be read into what I'm sharing, need to know this. They have a need to know. And so do you, the public, so you're not fooled. Don't be fooled again. And Mr. Putin needs to know this, because there is a group that has malice aforethought and has planned to launch these assets in a way that would look like 100% like an attack on our planet or on human assets, calling it alien when it's being run by people. I call it the Wizard of Oz. So you have these guys, it's like the Wizard of Oz, remember at the end, they pull the curtain back and there's this old crudmudgeon pulling all the levers, scaring the hell out of Dorothy. And I call it the Wizard of Oz effect. But it's very sophisticated, and we should not underestimate their capacity. Back some years ago, I hosted in Washington, prior to the National Press Club event in 2001, a private briefing for Congress that was at the Westin Hotel in Georgetown. And there were a number of people there and chairmen of committees. And Edgar Mitchell was there as my guest. He's passed on now. And one of the gentlemen who was there was a man who had been on an interagency committee in 1974. Now, this is 42 years ago. And the testimony he was going to provide to those members of Congress and other people, there was a science advisor for Vice President Al Gore there, all kinds of folks, was that we had this capability I'm telling you about today in November of 2016, and that all they would have to do is push a button, boom, and the entire event would roll out. And he said everyone on planet Earth would be fooled. Now, if I had heard that only from one person, I would have discounted it as madness. I've heard it from one person after another, after another, after another, after another, on a granular level. And now we have an Air Force Office of Special Investigations counterintelligence officer confirming the false flag operations. But he would not discuss, he says, that's still very secret, that's very secret, I can't talk about that. We have it on camera, jumping out of his skin, because I asked the question in a way that he understood. Do you know about the deceptive INWs and the false INWs? No one else running the cameras knew what that term meant. He did. This is in the film. Now, what happens then when you have a black operation that is so secretive that they could pull off a stunt like this? It means they could stampede the entire world into an Independence Day, like the movie, event. Has this already been beta tested? Yes. So they beta tested and have been testing on the public sightings that are man-made UFOs, often piggybacking on sightings of actual ET craft, so that people are confused, don't have any discernment. They've also been involved in using first the stagecraft of little people, and I mean no offense to short people. I know sometimes people get prickly when I talk about this because I'm 6'4", but special operations folks who are under 5 feet and with certain makeup and masks on these anti-gravities who would go then and abduct people. So there have been abduction squads, which are also confirmed by this Air Force intelligence officer, that have been operative for decades. And when it has suited the intelligence community, they have engaged in human abductions that 100% fool those poor victims who really think they were abducted by an ET. And they weren't, but it sure looks like it. Now there are two modalities used here. The aircraft itself, which is an anti-grav. The stagecraft initially were special operations personnel who now they have robotic ones that look actually like certain species of ETs, the extraterrestrial biological entities in the EBINs. But they're man-made. I know several people who worked on making these creatures, and they've been called programmed life forms. But they have integrated circuits in their neural complex. They're 100% man-made. But they would fake, they would absolutely fool 99.999999 to out to 100 decimal points. Anyone in the public that it was extraterrestrial. Those are fully operational, have been for decades. The early ones were these more clumsy attempts. It's also done in association with electromagnetic weapon systems that alter awareness, can make you black out, and also certain chemicals, drugs, canisters that'll be thrown and the person will then pass out, have no memory of what happened, and then awaken with this other event happen, having been abducted by an extraterrestrial. A lot of people have said, oh, Dr. Greer says no one's ever been abducted. I said, yeah, they have. And they attempted to abduct me out of my hotel room at the St. Moritz Hotel in July of 1994 when I met with Prince Hans Adam von Liechtenstein. So I'm one of those victims. I know what they're capable of. The difference with me is that I knew what it was. Now this gets more complex. And we haven't scratched the surface. And I don't know how disturbed you are yet, but it's going to get worse. Take a deep breath. So in 1989, there was a guy named Mikhail Gorbachev, who was head of the Soviet Union. And then during that period of the Bush era, President Bush, George H.W. Bush, not W, but George H.W., elder, who had been CIA director. And he was a mid-level person on this MAGIC committee, Majority Intelligence Committee, or Majestic. And he and Gorbachev and Paris de Cuellar, who is the Secretary General of the United Nations, and others were planning to disclose that we weren't alone in an event, a disclosure event. In November of 1989, Perez de Cuellar was abducted out of his motorcade at about 3 a.m. in New York City by aliens. Now, I put in parentheses aliens, meaning human assets. And he was taken and on board this human-controlled abduction event and told that if he were to continue with that plan, that the aliens would abduct everyone involved, including the President of the United States. And Prince Hans Adam von Liechtenstein told me this personally because he was personal friends with Perez de Cuellar, the UN Secretary General. And the Crown Prince of Liechtenstein said to me, "This is why I don't believe you'll be successful at disclosing the extraterrestrial presence." And I just smiled and I said, "Well, I believe you have it backwards." And he did not know, this was in July of 1994, of the ability of the intelligence community to set up a hoax of someone like a world figure, political figure like the head of the United Nations. That actually happened. Now, because of that, Gorbachev, Bush Sr., the president, Perez de Cuellar, and others involved canceled the plans to let the public know we weren't alone, because they were concerned that, and I was told, and I'm quoting by Prince Hans von Liechtenstein, that this blew up like an atomic bomb in the Bush White House, and they said, we're staying out of this now. And ever since then, no one in that office has wanted to deal with this, because they don't know what's ET and now what's human. And the stagecraft and the ability to interfere with plans by people who are congressmen or UN secretary generals or presidents is so great that none of them want to risk that happening to them. Because in those elite circles, trust me, because I've been in meetings, those folks don't want that to happen to them. Or worse. This is why, you know, when I got this information to President Bill Clinton via his CIA director, 2 months or a month later, a very good friend of the Clinton family came to my home and said, well, they really support what you're recommending, but they're afraid that if President Clinton does this, he will end up like Jack Kennedy. And I laughed. I thought he was joking. And he says, "What are you laughing at? I'm being serious." This guy was a jokester, sort of bag man for the Democratic Party, fundraiser. And I said, well, if that's true, we really are in trouble. Now, that was in January of 1994. And you can see why between December of 1993 and the summer of 1994, I was canceling my involvement in this subject. I had to be begged to stay in it, because this is very difficult. So this is how long I've known this. So I think that my problem personally, and I'm saying as a man, one fallible human, is who do I share this with, and when, and what detail? I am only scratching the surface. And because of what has been happening with the WikiLeaks, with John Podesta's emails about UFOs, the New York Times reporting on Hillary's interest in it, which this was a red line subject, the mainstream media starting to report it, they are being unleashed. To me, there are signs out there that this false flag hoaxing of an attack on the planet is closer than it's been in 22 years that I've been involved.